Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of the Lifting's Guide to Galactic History. Today we are just going to gather some information, little snippets of information about the tragedy in Egypt. Ancient Egypt, some people would know it as, or the Fairytale. So we're just going to ask a series of questions to any benevolent guide that wishes to come in to talk about this subject, and or was there a benevolent guide that was there that can answer these questions. A couple of them that would have answered these are not present, but I'm calling in now anyone benevolent, that is, and you have to specify that wishes to answer these questions. So, anybody that was there that is benevolent. Okay. Show me your heart space to show me that you're all right. Okay. All right. Now I know who's here with us. Several, actually. But who wants to speak before I announce who this is? Who wants to speak? Just you? Okay. This is somebody that was not only present on ancient Atlantis, but in Egypt and in the ancient Mayan culture as well. This is somebody that our YouTube viewers would know as K, surrounded by other people that are a mixture of ancient Mayan and look like they're wearing Atlantean attire, I want to say, and some Lemurian. It's a mixture of both of them. So what we are going to talk about is Egypt. So naturally I start to itch when stuff starts to happen, so okay. So it's Kay that wants to actually talk? Okay, and nobody else? No. Oh, they're just here as an energetic buffer. All right. Comes in slow. Greetings. You know me as K, even though my actual name is much longer than a single letter. The tragedy this one speaks of was a history, and still is a history mostly untold. This history that you know of as the fantasy or fairy tale that is Egypt is a lie. It is connected not only to Atlantis and somewhat of Lemuria, but is connected to the stain or the quantum entanglement that destroyed Deir Maldek as well, and the Sidonian plateau on Mars. This was part of a plot by the darkness to invade through dissension. Just like in your culture now, the dissension between people, the for and against, this all was reflected then. But what is going to be done today is not from the beginning to end history, but specific fragments that wish to be discussed. So, we will just start with questions.
Thank you, Kay, for coming in. So Chris and I were talking earlier before we decided to do this segment and go ahead and film it, because we really have been exploring ancient Egypt for very good reasons. I know people, and we've said before, that Lemuria, Atlantis, and then Egypt were basically kind of the last three areas that the darkness needed to completely infiltrate and take over to really more have their whole farming network set up on the surface. So the difference between Lemuria and Atlantis and Egypt is what we refer to as the fairy tale. Because instead of just destroying a society, the goal was to be able to then take a society and indoctrinate them into a different belief system that actually would perpetuate the farming needs. And that's why Egypt is so important, because that is where that occurred. And it actually led to some of the, let's call them negative overlords, whatever you want to call them, from where people were actually literally seeing some of these other entities walk the earth, that it became no longer necessary after the fairy tale really got entrenched for these beings to walk the earth. They could go other places, kind of go in the shadows, because the farming almost went on perpetual motion now. So that's what's really important and sets Egypt apart from the other ones. It's what came out of it, that it was actually destroyed. So my questions when we were talking about this earlier had to do with some basic understandings with the premise of what everyone has said regarding how the darkness comes in and invades. And from what we said, it came in and invaded through changing the minds, changing the thought processes, making people paranoid, making people not trust, how it all basically occurred. And then some of the specifics regarding what it actually meant for this society. Because in general, it's our understanding that you had basically an extended family that really benevolently for quite a while were leaders of an area. And then that darkness kind of started invading in, and they were gifted. They certainly did have psychic abilities and different things intact. And that I am wondering, and this is really now getting to the questions, I believe they always had spiritual rituals. I believe they at one time just were benevolent. They would always try and pray and make sure the next generation had the right leaders. But somewhere along the line, my question is, like other areas, did kind of a darker black magic ensue? And then what actually literally happened to those once benevolent people? Were their psyches split? Did they go in and participate in some rituals and really came out of it not knowing what they did? And then who took that energy from it to almost, again, perpetuate the darkness coming in?
In this is a bit of a complex web, you would say. In this, once good people, very benevolent people you would recognize in history, began to do what you would call as conjurings across the void. They began to systematically bring in different aspects of the nasty entanglement which claimed Deir Maldek. These harvester intrusions, or the whims of the clockmaker Dear James talked about, rotated through aspects of time like a giant gear, all entering aspects of time that corresponded in a parallel fashion, but all at once. All these conjurings needed was a particular cycle, a particular gear, a whim of the clock, a flick of the wrist, a concept unknown to most, a conjuring and consent. These rituals took form after a while in your history as satanic. But to backtrack back to Egypt, some good people saw that these conjurings were taking place. At first, they were very innocent. They were people talking to those they thought were in spirit. These people were your Egyptian pantheon that you know them to be, such as Isis, Osiris, Hathor, and all the rest. However, one thing that was askew during the times of Atlantis, the one you know of as Isis, was the one that started to bring in this different entanglement, to sow this seed of dark intentions, this stain across the fabric of time. So therefore, when good and innocent people discovered these plots and these entanglements, they were, as you would say, infected with this entanglement. A dangerous virus was born out of this entanglement, turning people into those that wished the entire galaxy and universe to look and act just like themselves. Yes, these are the threads of Orion and the darker threads of Sirius. Not all is as it appears to be in your history. The good people that attempted to stop this, as I said, were then turned into the ghouls of the sands. The virus did this to them. There is a chamber, a very dangerous chamber, where there are winged reptilians underneath the pyramids. You would call them the seraphim. These sand ghouls are both representations of them and ghoulish representations of those poor people that were transformed. Some are in chambers underground that may or may not be able to be cured, given how far along this virus progressed. But the ghouls that are there are the embodiment of that virus. The one you know of as Angema Isis conjured this on dear Atlantis, when the sacred feminine cloister, you would call it, ended up bringing these entanglements across the vastness of dimensions and time. I was part of that cloister and noticed a difference in action and energy with all these dear women. Some of these dear women exist now to this day in their fractaled form. This is how you encountered dear Angema Isis when she would frequently visit. We are not saying there was not goodness there. Once there was. But there's something here that I wish to reiterate about the romanticizing of ancient Egypt. You have your story of Osiris, you have your story of Isis, and you have them being the soulmate counterparts of each other, one from Orion, one from Sirius. You have this whole romanticized story from the stars. Maybe at one time there was a small bit of truth to this. But no. This was anything but. Yes, Osiris was good, and there were parts of Angema Isis that were good, but this entanglement she brought in made it possible for the same thing that claimed dear Maldek to claim the oasis in Egypt, fractalizing it in time and allowing the dark cloud of Nibiru to infect the area. The good beings out there felt the only way to get rid of this sickness was to, as you would say, nuke the area with radiation. This is why today you find green glass under the sands called tektite. However, the infection still exists to this day, but it is trapped far underground and locked away. Many chambers like that existed across your planet, but there was an epicenter, an entanglement to nothing. I am telling people now the romantic tale that you know of as Angema Isis and Osiris. No, because most of the story that you saw that is written was after dear Osiris lost his heart and became the green being you know him as. You see, that family line is an embodiment of that entanglement. I will explain, because this has to do with the question, the conjuring by dear Isis. Even in a time where she may not have even looked like she was attached to this darkness at all. The same went for Maldek. Even before a time, before Nibiru flooded the skies. Time is one. So therefore the nightmare scenarios that dear Osiris had, the one you know of as Osiris, I should say, it is a family. Then, not only arced to the past, you see Osiris, Orion, one and the same, arced to the future, when that entanglement, embodiment, or expression became a knot in time, to where the servants of darkness at the time, the reptilian forms, began to inject that virus within him from across time to the entanglement of Nibiru at the time. This is how these physical forces got there to begin with, through a conjuring, through an entanglement, through an intention, through a consent. Now, this is how he became green, not through healing, like your stories say. This is another part of the romanticizing. Nope. Think of it very simply. Green, Orion, reptilian, servant. Consent. These souls came in at the time to experience this. This is true. Now, at the time, dear Anubis was caught up in this as well. When Osiris at the time was being healed, per your mythology, was he torn apart like in the mythology? Yes. Was it his brother? No. It was these Draco-reptilians that tore him to pieces. Was he put back together? Yes. But then, this entanglement, this virus, was able to take hold, and he became this green figure through a conjuring. And I will explain further, because this is a bit of information neither one of you know. But it pertains to the question. Anubis, you knew of as Michael. This you knew. But through his own black magic at the time, he too was entangled because of the consent given on Maldek for the darkness to mess with him. Though he did other things then. He did indeed bring back dear Osiris, and it was not a mistake that the green took hold. This was intentional, because the fairy tale had to begin. Fairytale then became an acquisition of guilt, as in your heart and feather have and have not. This is how souls became ensnared, energy collectors were conjured and placed on that site. Is Egypt in that area holy now? I would say not. Was it in the time of peace that will come again? Absolutely. But that entanglement always was going to loom and always had to have a period of being there and passing. Though this was all conjured, this, as dear James would say, would be a sacrificial archetype. Very much just like Maldek. Because all these places were entangled, therefore that blemish or stain had to be removed by anchoring it. Now, anybody that consented to this originally taking place, like dear Isis, was then sent over to this other timeline. It was a slow progression, and in this, she did not stand alone. There were others, there were many others, that also entered that other timeline. You would call them the Dark Assyrians. Not unlike the nation, but more anchored to a darker version of the Sirius star system. Their planet of Nastea became no different than Nibiru, a wasteland, a uninhabitable place. Most did not enter that. It was just that grouping. That people that bilocate or entangle with get attacked from the Sirius system. That is that one individual group. It is not the voice of the Sirius system. The same goes for Orion. They're getting an echo of the negative Orion conquistadors of time and space, and not the vastness and populace that is in that area. That also had to be known, but I believe that sufficiently answered your question.
Yes, except if you don't mind clarifying one other, because I know a lot of people, myself, Chris, and many others that we have met were in that time frame. We were there, and we're here now, and so there is a lot of thought going there. So I really am trying to get to the specifics about. I understand when things and people cross the line and they themselves don't realize they are becoming dark. There were certainly a lot of people who saw all of this darkness coming in and tried so hard to not let it come in, but then they themselves in their actions became dark and started making decisions to kill certain people or certain things like that in their mind, trying to push it back, hold it back. But I am curious because I think somehow, it applies to today with some of the Cabal family members. So I am asking because of that. Is it possible when people that are brought into things for conjuring, is it possible, does it occur, did it occur then, that good people had a break, like a psychological break, and would be involved in certain things, but then wouldn't remember doing them? Like, for example, did sexual circles start up then? And did people get involved in this, but then they walked out of it and had their lives, and literally they didn't know what they did. They just provided the energy that I think then someone else really took and did something with. So I am asking for some very specific information.
You are correct. there were those that did not know they were entangled in this. They had their energies and memories wiped from them just so they could keep performing these duties. The very same thing goes on in your modern day world of today. The same thing goes on. People have acted during abduction scenarios, sexual circle scenarios, and they do not remember what they've done, good or bad. In this, the same happened then. This is why it was so unfortunate, because those people became entangled in something they did not even remember they became entangled in. In fact, this was the vast majority of the infected. They did not know that they were being worked on, experimented on, if you will, entangled with, and becoming part of the romanticizing of the fantasy, of the fairy tale. This is an unfortunate thing that I was there, unfortunately, to witness. You may be asking, how? This is another story in and of itself, but this goes to your other question about the origin of the sexual circles. It was not just Egypt. It was in a place you knew of as Sodom and Gomorrah in your Bible. Both are mutually interchangeable. This virus actually infected both those cities just as it did in ancient Egypt. It was dear Enlil that had to purge these two cities of both the draconian influence and the virus. In this, your sexual energy was being used to fuel this virus. The virus mutates in two different ways: fear and anger, and darkness, and sexuality. It forks in the road in whatever the host requires it to be. Some of those very people that were infected over here went to Sodom and Gomorrah over here. Then, this is why dear Enlil felt it necessary to incinerate those two cities to cinder. This is why anyone that entered there within a certain intention of consent, this is not just in the debaucherous consent that you know of, there was another component. The harvester spheres were also there, gaining energy from the skies. What you saw and heard about in your biblical story was both Enlil trying to quarantine this place and the spheres conducting a harvest. After they had conducted their harvest, Enlil time-locked and quarantined these two cities, effectively erasing them from the maps so nobody would go in search of. This is why certain aspects of Egypt are unknown. This is why sometimes the location of Atlantis is unknown. This is why certain histories are unknown. This also has to do with time travel. But this also has to do with erasing history of these malevolent beings so they are not focused on, and that entanglement does not infect other people, either in viral form or in energetic form. This is why their face is being erased from history. This is why in Egypt, Akhenaten was killed. The people understood what he actually was. This was not a revolt over religion. It never was. They killed him because he tried to harvest their energy with his father Aten, both of whom have been erased from history with the exception of an incarnation of each. That soul, or those two souls, can actually start over in this paradigm, because that entanglement was no more, because that history was erased within their energy, being reclaimed by Source. Now, the sexual circles in Egypt, in the good times, there were good things that took place in a sexual way. Good, fantastic, wonderful things. Even gatherings that were more ritualistic in nature honored the land, honored those who came before, and honored the female and male forms. This is what was bastardized by your 13 Cabal families because of the fact they are not only wanting their gods to take this energy in acts of perversion, but they began to fall into this entanglement themselves in some respects. This perversion has gone two different directions, both ending up at the same result, the stealing of the energy of both the viewer watching these acts and the ones that are participating therein. A double-edged sword. You have your Cabal people who watch, and you have the participants, which goes back to them not knowing that they are doing this. Think of a scenario in any neighborhood, any house, any two people engaging in sexual acts or more. Picture that they do not know that they are actors. They do not know that they are following a script from a piece of technology that has the ability to keep people on scripts that are of a lower frequency. We are not saying those people are bad for being in the lower frequency. We are just saying certain frequencies can break out of the scripting. These devices have the ability to either be typed on or written on, like a pen. Think of a two-way mirror within a home, just a regular mirror, that are the camera points for this scenario that is being filmed. Think of these people coming home, thinking they are just coming home. But in fact, the whole neighborhood is a set, you see. It could be any house, anywhere, could be any neighborhood. To the sensitive kind, this can be sensed when you pass through one of these sets. These people actually believe they are living the lives of those characters. They may even say and call themselves the names of those characters. But in that scenario, it is a falsehood. Then eventually, once that energy has run its course, they are put back in their normal lives so they do not get declared missing. Now, has some of this been filmed and put out there on your financial markets? Yes, it has. Unbeknownst to those people. It is not all of them, mind you. But it is some of them. And this is how this perpetuates. Sometimes it goes to the point those people die of energies being extracted. Sometimes they are sold off into the galactic sexual rings, which are being shut down as we speak. Sometimes these buildings are disguised as other buildings such as churches, banks, and other like places. The Cabal sexual circle buildings are usually cubical in nature, to where they can all look from all angles to a central squared hub. Now, in this, these people are also set free from time to time when they are found in space. They are also found in space in this respect. And they are rescued, but then they are returned to their actual lives. Some do remember to some extent, but some do not. in the respects where they cannot forget. They actually must remain out in the galactic community. But just know, the origin of this particular practice was the fantasy, such as Egypt and Sodom and Gomorrah. Those are the two known origin points of this practice.
Thank you. That's a lot of information to digest, but I actually am very grateful that you came through, that a lot of people really wouldn't have known what they did. I think so many people would be horrified. We think about that often when we even think about the backstage, and we know that a lot of people are interested in the backstage in the secret space program, and of course they would be. But again, I hate to say it, sometimes with their repeated stories are almost glorifying some of this as well, because it wasn't, or I hope it's better. I don't know. I can just reflect from myself that it maybe wasn't as glorious as people want to paint the picture at all, even with any of that. And people would be horrified to know what they maybe really got involved in, or were, let's say, bit programmed to get involved in. So I really am glad you're saying that, because I think as the information, some of this information comes out, whether it's ancient Egypt, whether it's some of these other things, people may have breakthrough memories and they are not going to be happy with themselves at all. And, you know, we just want to reiterate that a lot of things, a lot of oppression, a lot of things were done, and just do your best to just look at it as a story, but that's not who you are. That's not who you are now. So with that, I think one of my thoughts that I was hoping maybe you could comment on is bigger than just Egypt. I know, again, one of the people that was there known as Isis, but really her soul name is Angema, and many people had multiple lives in different time frame. The one who was known as Isis was no different. And she was a member of soul family for myself and for many others that are out there, for Chris as well. And I think back to when the darkness in general, when there was really that discussion that maybe the heat needed to be turned off, maybe a little bit more contrast, right as before the darkness started invading in thoughts and then breaking through. I am just really curious whether you know this or not. I just get this feeling about Angema that she decided to want to explore the darkness side, not in one life, but as we're seeing in many lives, helping to really bring some of that contrast in. But part of me feels, again, all of those that were involved with creating some of this and thinking, again, as an education, they didn't realize they were in the midst of it themselves. And that I sometimes get this feeling that I think she felt there was going to be a savior or somebody to save her from what she got really involved in and horribly, horribly entangled, to the point where basically she couldn't exist anymore. She had to be she had just too many pieces of her floating around. So I just am curious about, I guess this is a broader question, not just her, but others. Did they actually themselves suffer from any sort of savior thoughts?
This is quite lengthy, but I will try to condense this. The one you know of as Angema did indeed believe that she was going to be saved in the end by her soul family. But the entanglements were so dense that there was never any hope of that taking place, but the thoughts were left there to stew, you would say, Was I there and had to know this and digest this myself? Yes. Was it something that all of us relished? No. Could she have been saved, even if all of us had been present and fully active? No. And I will explain why. With that stain that was aforementioned, the quantum entanglement that was part of that collapsed reality, any element attached to that, and this is why I do not encourage people to try to conjure Nibiru, talk about Nibiru in more of a historical sense, more than just a historical sense, or any of that blemish. We're not saying don't talk about history, because we are doing as such. Do not entangle with that. These people, knowing or unknowing, got entangled. Now, were some of the others that did not know as such able to be drawn back out through subversion of different revocations in nonchalant ways? Yes. But just like dear Maldek, there had to be something that anchored to that entanglement. In this case, someone. You may think that a scapegoat. No. The soul knew very well that this was going to take place. There are beings out there known as sacrificial archetypes. In this, she, along with a few of her closest followers and worshippers, she did have worshippers too. That's how far down the rabbit hole she went. Became entangled, therefore had to go with that stain into non-existence. Now, is there a time where the soul could be reconstituted in this reality minus the entanglements? Absolutely. But that process is very lengthy. Very lengthy indeed, and cannot just be accomplished in a poof of smoke, like a magician. Source must reallocate the energy after the absorption. Is she gone forever? No. Nothing is gone forever. But this process, as I said, is quite lengthy. The energy must go through a transmutation through a place called the unending, or the drain as you call it. This must go to a clear to another end of the omniverse. These souls can be brought back here. Would they remember everything when they came back? Would those souls remember? Yes, because Source remembers. That soul eventually would be brought back into full constitution, but not now. Granted, there might be fragments out there that are being used by other dark beings to draw people in to the whims of Isis. But are those beings Isis, or are they just puppets themselves to the same dark whims? That's for the public to decide. I am saying discernment, discernment, discernment in that area. But in summation, this entanglement entangled people very much like it entangled a planet. Granted, there were people saved from this calamity on Maldek and on Earth and on Mars. Not in the way that you expect. What I mean by saved in Mars is this. They got, how can I put this in the layman, reabsorbed and put back in a time before an entanglement took place. Mars, it was easier. Granted, no soul has escaped that soul trap. But a reversal has been done for souls that have passed between Maldek and Mars. I know that it's complicated, but that is the layman that I can go with this. This, I believe, answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And another clarification, I guess, it's what Chris and I believe, but I guess a really good clarification. So, as I call it, the slaughter. I'm sorry, I don't know any other good words for it. It was a war and it was a slaughter. For those that ended up dying as the darkness came in, Hathor was definitely one of them. Osiris had to Draco come up behind him. Even though their bodies were maybe put back together, let's say, their souls, though, their real souls, and others who were maybe slaughtered, but yet the virus and whatever, they were kind of, I don't know, almost like walking zombies. I don't know that a soul re-entered them at all. They were just now more in line doing bidding. But there was really a point when, even though the body may have been used for other things, to do other things, there really was a point, though, that there was a release of the original soul within the body, even though these bodies, like turning into green Osiris now, where they were released from this. Is that correct?
Yes. In the case of Osiris, this one is the incarnation of such, but there was always a single shard retained in order to create a perpetual life force in these vampiric people, these poor people that became the origin of what you know of as vampires on Earth. No. Was there a soul there? No. The souls of the people left, but was there information retained within the cells to some extent? And could there be a quantum entanglement to that old body? Yes. When those draconian forces came in, they attempted to get some information from those poor people and those bodies. They kept reanimating them over and over again to get information that was attached to the soul, not just the genetic form. What was in the genetic form, in the genetic memory, was an echo, not enough for them to harvest information. They were looking for information on time, space, other entanglements, other places they could invade and gain sovereigns. They were also attempting to get other bits of information about the quantum structure of the soul, because the beings that wanted this had no soul light. They wanted to bring this back within themselves because of the universe that they came from, took it from them. In this, the people that were reanimated as vampiric forms had no soul light. It was merely the will of others. Those souls eventually incarnated later, and those forces thought by throwing them in the farming cycle, they could eventually get that very information out of them through incarnation and incarnation and incarnation. But it did not work because of the ascending energies, you would say, in this time. See, all time is one, and where there is one entanglement, there is another. Therefore, it made that information extraction impossible by any being that was dark and any being that did not contain soul light and balance and all things in the universe. This is where this comes from. This requires a heart space, an open heart space to access. These beings could not do this. So, those very souls came in with the information. But these darker beings that exist in this time frame that you find yourself in cannot extract the information because they are too far gone and they have no heart space in which to read the information with. I believe this answers your question.
Yes, thank you. I think this will make a lot of people feel better. I tend to believe that a lot of people that are feeling really drawn to Egypt, must have somehow even been a part of, I hate to say it again, I call it the slaughter, and their bodies reanimated. It's like unfinished business. So I'm making an assumption. Maybe you can just make a quick comment on that unfinished business, being literally killed, but the body still being, kind of reanimated and used, is in itself an entanglement that may draw a soul back to look at it somehow.
Yes, this is indeed so. This is what they are hoping on, that entanglement is strong enough to gain this information. This is why a soul shard was kept in the chest area of the different puppets, or genetic puppets, you would say. Then, during that slaughter, they were hoping then they could read through the heart spaces of everyone in your modern day as well. You see, those beings entered at the same moment, but at different moments in time, and they could all talk to each other across the vastness of time. They were hoping that quantum entanglement from that chest shard of that soul then could arc over to the modern day person. But once that quantum entanglement is revoked and not fantasized over or romanticized over, with people connecting to this story, not in this way that we're doing, but in a romanticizing way, in a fantasy way, or a sexual way, therefore that entanglement can be revoked and source light can fill in that area. This would be the soul shard of origin that is capable of this. This completely cuts off that entanglement to that green vampiric self, you would say, and that entanglement is no longer possible. This is why some people have this entanglement in the heart space or heart chakra, because they need that soul shard of origin to cut off that entanglement. This one knows what I speak of. You know what I speak of in this. This is why they inserted that soul shard in the chest. They were thinking with technology and with their mighty brain power, they could ignite that entanglement. This also goes back to the sexual circles. This is why you see sexual fantasies associated with ancient Egypt. We are not saying all those are wrong. Again, there were good things like that happened there. People are also picking up on those. This is not all of these occurrences. This is a very specific occurrence, a very specific quantum entanglement that must die on the vine. I believe this answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I actually had another one, and now it seems to escape me. Let me think for a quick second. Oh, my question was the rate. This is another thing. I guess when I think about any of the places, Atlantis, Lemuria, but it's heavily on my mind about Egypt, is the rate at which the influencing and things started and how things went downhill. It just may be my limited understanding growing up there. Maybe I was a child fantasizing about my parents and grandparents and not really knowing their entanglements. But it felt like to me that this actually came on quickly, like within a generation, let's say, and a half, that it came in and enveloped it and went rather quickly, rather than thinking that changes in thought and changes in mind happened, a century or so longer, multiple generations to turn that way. It seemed fast to me, but again, I don't have great perspective because I just can remember from childhood. I may have been just looking at parents and grandparents, and people had him a little bit on a pedestal. But I am curious about the rate. Did it happen that quickly?
Unfortunately, yes, it did. In that particular area, it happened much quicker than it did in other areas. Even though you would think near Maldek it happened quickly, it really did not happen as fast there as it did in Egypt. As you said, it was only a couple of generations of influence, unlike your modern day, where this influence has been spread over centuries. This is how it usually goes. Granted, Maldek was quick by those standards as well. So was Mars. But in this, it was much quicker, because an assertion or a stapling of that energy by these demonic harvesters needed to happen much faster. They needed a grounding area to set up shop, you would say. And they knew by jumping ahead in time that they did not have the luxury of centuries doing this. So it had to happen quicker in that area. This is what you were picking up on. This is what you were sensing and feeling, that it was the same dissension pattern. But in that particular time slot, they did not have the luxury or the inclination of centuries. So they closed that off almost as quickly as they began that cycle, because they were in a hurry to establish that quantum entanglement connection here. Then they had the luxury of centuries to arc over to this time frame, thinking they had the powers of gods themselves in order to change the tides of what was actually what you would consider to be destined to take place, which is the energy changeover you all are experiencing now. I believe this answers the question.
It does, and that is really helpful to me personally. For me personally, being there, I can just say during those times, by the time of my death, and I did die a young woman, schizoid is one of the words I can use. There was so much confusion. There was desperation. There was, a sense of trying to protect. But there were so many emotions, and it wasn't something that had come on from seeing your parents. There was somewhat of a calm there. It just flooded throughout that lifetime, and and again, such desperation at the end. I really do believe there was certainly a bulk group of people that were, for whatever reason, hadn't quite succumbed to the darkness's agenda. I don't know why. I don't know why some were maybe more influential than others, but it seems that there were still some that were desperately trying to stop this from coming in. Is that true?
Yes, there were groups from a future time frame that were attempting to rewrite all of these aspects of time and reset it to the time before the invasions took place, before Nibiru cut across the ethers. Was this possible in some cases? Absolutely. As I've said, if all those entanglements are revoked in most cases, this can be. But are those fixed points in time that were part of that stain? Yes, but the beings you know of as the White Knights of Aether came in to try to rewrite places such as Atlantis, Lemuria, Egypt, Maldek, and Mars, thinking if they could conquer that particular dragon, so to speak, in their opinion, they could rewrite anything else. Were they successful in saving other people, a lot of other people, including a lot of the M-House line. Absolutely. Were they also successful in unfortunately entangling themselves in the stain? In a few cases, yes. This is unfortunately so, but the vast majority of them managed to change the tides of war. You see, in the old timeline, there was a nuclear conflict shortly after this time frame that you sit in now that desolated the Earth and eventually paved way for the Nibiru timeline. They were able to schism that enough to where the Earth they came from, where it was overrun with harvesters, not quite the Nibiru timeline, but not enough. They were able to take that timeline away completely altogether and reassert the paradise that they knew and lived in as well. This may sound contradictory, but think of time as one and a lot of these quantum entanglements as one. Good ones can be permanent and beneficial at times. So, was this group able to accomplish what they set out to accomplish, as well as enter the illusion and start to change the vibration out of these harvester spheres' favor? Yes. So yes, this did indeed occur.
And, you know, I also believe, as I think many galactics do, that bottom line, you know, there's either source intervention. There was never going to be allowed for souls just to tumble and constantly go down the toilet and something to completely dominate and control always. That really does violate free will at its foundation. So there would always be potentially moments in time that would maybe surprise everybody, even the galactics, anybody who is in here, because something just occurs. And, you know, for me, when those somethings just occur, that again, I just easily refer to it as a source intervention, because it's not going to be allowed to go but so far. So in this instance, it is my understanding that with all of the tragedy, with all of the, you know, slaughter, with all of the virus, with everything that happened, that a source intervention occurred, because that was also a moment in time when a genetic alteration occurred. I don't know if from your viewpoint or from others' viewpoints, they would just consider it something spontaneous, or just finally the right combinations of genetics came together. But at that moment in time, it's kind of my understanding that a genetic happening occurred where what we now refer to as the uncorruptible gene came into play. And so I'm just curious, do you, or do the Galactics, do you guys look at that as a source intervention, or do you just say, no, finally the right couple of genetics finally got together? Or I'm just curious how the Galactics look at this moment, because this is something, again, is something as horrible that it happened, the fairy tale began, but also something wonderful happened that would help bring people out of it.
This was not just a spontaneous gathering of genetics. This was actually a contingency plan of both source and some of these future kind that came across the vast distances of time. This uncorruptible gene only sporadically exists across your world. Those who contain it have either been killed by your cabal lines because they cannot be controlled genetically or mentally, or they are in hiding, or they're in a different part of the galaxy altogether. You see, the good people out there kept sanctuaries out there, such as your planet New Haven and various other places. These particular people that have the strongest cluster of the uncorruptible genes can also not have their memories wiped by good or bad erasure technology. Those people were then placed somewhere else so that eventually they could have children there. Those children placed back upon the earth, creating new immunity gene clusters. And in time, that good entanglement would make sure that these harvester agendas could no longer take place. Now, are there other beings out there in other cultures that leave children behind in a similar fashion so that their children have stake in this world as well, as part of their own agendas and own plans and own genetic compositions in that fashion, and sometimes experiments? Yes. But as for the immunity gene, it is done in a similar fashion from planets such as New Haven and various other ones I will not name here, but this is an ultimate plan to get these spontaneous, as you say, emergences of this immunity gene. Did some of this start back in ancient Egypt? Yes, it did. With some of the very children of some of these spindly lines, you would call them. This is something that they did not take lightly. They would think this a joke on their agenda. They would think Source or God hates them, and that was their destiny and right and birthright to take over the timelines. No. It is the birthright of those that are in the moment. These people with the immunity gene and all other aspects of humanity. It is the right to exist. It is not the right of these other beings to take your place. These immunity genes make it impossible for them to swap out consciousnesses, just as they do sometimes. Some of your very own people are indeed they, just with a consciousness swapped out through technology and genetic reknitting, you would say, into a clone form. They have accomplished this in some respects, but they have never, ever been able to take over the immunity gene. And once that has reasserted itself for a few more generations, any stragglers, you would say, that are left in time, as well as on your modern day Earth, will not be able to assert themselves. Now, would others try from different time frames? Yes, there may be some stragglers for decades to come. We cannot promise this will not happen. But this immunity gene is more of a shield. One day, all humans will contain this gene, very much like the ones that are out there in the cosmos. Eventually, your galactic cousins will reemerge, and a mass society of humans will form again. And yes, you do have other humans out there that were not captured in the old days, that are from the old human lines that are out there. This can be gotten into at another time, but just know that the immunity gene is from your own people, not only from other times, but out there in the cosmos.
Thank you. So again, wanting to leave something a little bit uplifting to let people know that, again, in the midst of a great tragedy, it was not meant for this current timeline, which is to become the positive experience timeline, for it never to occur. It was always meant to occur. So we've actually talked for quite a while, and I really appreciate it because, again, Chris and I have been really working hard with memories that we have had to really help people understand the truth about Egypt, and we've been working on that. So these answered some of the, or reaffirmed, I guess, some of the thoughts that we were having to be able to put on page. But any last words, Kay? Anything you'd like to say before we end?
Yes, this is something that others have touched on thusly, but I will do so again. And I will reiterate and summarize a bit what I've said. This entanglement you call the fantasy, we are not saying just sexual fantasies. That is not what I'm getting at. Those can be a good thing, as I've said. Focusing on this fantasy of Egypt and this fantasy of how can I put this, traveling the stars as some fantastical voyage. Yes, can that part happen? Yes, but not at this current moment, only within your heart and your soul. Now, the fantasy that is Egypt, and that of this planet Nibiru that you seem to fantasize coming around and doing either harm to your people or saving your people. Neither one will happen. Focusing on the fantasy of Egypt and this fantasy and story that is Nibiru coming around, or Planet X as you like to call it, coming around and causing disasters to your world. No, this is not to be so. Do not entangle with the fantasy, do not entangle with the story. Create your own stories if you'd like. There's nothing wrong or anything against this. But do not perpetuate this mythos about a mighty planet that is going to come back around and save all of you and give an upgrade. The most it would ever do, if it were still around, is desolate this current timeline. And as I've said, take your place in the stars, thinking this would give them the right to still exist outside of their dark timeline. That is the only thing that would happen. So do not fantasize this as some fantastical voyage saving the downtrodden Orion aliens or the lost timeline, as some have put it. Do not romanticize this. This reignites small forms of these entanglements. Do not anchor this to yourself. You will do yourself harm. This is what I have had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing so much with us tonight. So, Chris, I'll let you come out of this, see if you have any last comments.
Actually, yes, this is something that has been touched on quite a bit with this whole Planet X thing. This is something that when I see this, I know people are programmed to be entangled in this. I know these bad guys feel if enough people en masse, start thinking, oh, it's the end of the world, apocalypse, Nibiru is coming, all of this. Or flipping it around to Egypt and saying, oh, how wonderful and spiritual. Granted, are pyramid shapes wonderful and spiritual? Yes, they can be. They can be sacred geometry, but in that case, it was the opposite. So just know when you associate one with the other, you're actually associating the fantasy with helping to reemerge aspects of Nibiru or to help reemerge dust. So do not do this. Nibiru is not coming. Never has been. Was Egypt a great, wonderful fantasy oasis? Maybe long before the darkness came in, but the version of it that you know of and is in history was anything but. So don't entangle in either one. So that's what I have to say.
All right, guys. Well, thank you. This was actually a fact-finding conversation for us to kind of validate because, again, we're spending some time writing on it, and we thought we would just share with you what we literally do. We actually ourselves try to bring in channeled information, and then we actually like to have conversation to kind of validate and clarify our understandings, and this is literally what we do. So I hope you enjoyed it, and of course there's a lot more about Egypt that we'll be talking about, more specifics on the story as we understand it, and we will see you guys later. Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.